Am I the a-hole for telling my girlfriend I'm bothered by the way she and her family treat their house staff? I'm 25 male, dating this girl, 24 female, for about 5 months. I knew her family was well off based on the stories she told me about her upbringing, but I didn't get a chance to meet her parents until this week, when we all went to their beach house to spend a few days and celebrate her father's 60th birthday. The house wasn't just huge, but it also employed a staff of about 8 people. I was never used to being served like that, and I witnessed some behaviors from my girlfriend and some of her family towards the workers that made me feel uncomfortable. Some examples. A. After our first night, I heard her mother tell one of the housekeepers to clean the bedroom my girlfriend and I were staying in. I told her mother everything was in order and that I already made our bed before leaving. Her mother then told me, in the presence of the housekeeper, that I shouldn't bother because that's her, the housekeeper's job. B. The other morning, my girlfriend and I woke up after everyone else had their breakfast. I went into the kitchen to grab some coffee and saw the cooks were already starting to prep for lunch, so I told them I didn't want to bother them and made the coffee myself. My girlfriend came into the kitchen moments later and saw me making coffee. Later that day, she complained to her mother, without even asking me how things came about, that the cooks left me to make my own coffee. I had to explain everything. C. On her father's birthday, they had a fancy dinner with some other guests that came just that day, and some of the staff was made to stand in the room with their backs to the wall as we sat at the table and ate. It was like some Downton Abbey shit. I kept my mouth shut for the entire trip, but as soon as we came back, I couldn't hold it any longer, and told my girlfriend it made me really uncomfortable to see how she behaved towards the staff, and also gave some examples of instances when I felt her parents were rude to them. My girlfriend didn't take this well. She said that I'm the a-hole here for judging their lifestyle. In her mind, we had a perfect week together, and I was withholding my judgment until I could unleash it all on her. I don't think I'm an a-hole for speaking my mind. Obviously, people, regardless of their job, should be treated with respect. But I just want you to consider a different perspective for a second. The staff might be 100% okay with the behavior you saw. If they're paid enough, feel confident that it's better than other job options. An outsider seeing my job would probably think some parts of it are ridiculous, but those parts are worth it to me as the person actually doing the job. For example, when your girlfriend's mother said, "Don't make your bed," that's the staff's job, a staff member hearing that might think, "She's right? Please don't do my job for me," because then she has no reason to pay me for that job. I'm not saying you're in the wrong feeling uncomfortable with the behavior that you saw. I'm just cautioning you that you might be white knighting for people who are actually okay with the work environment that you saw. Those were my thoughts as I was reading too. I have never in my life been to a house where there are staff standing around the table while everyone is eating. I would feel uncomfortable too. But when I'm staying in a hotel, I find it normal that waiters are serving the food and then standing around to make sure everything is in order, and that cleaning staff are cleaning my room every day. It seems that this family is paying to have their household run as if it were a hotel. This doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, the OP might have misstepped by going to the kitchen and making their own coffee. It's possible that the staff saw this as an intrusion. I feel you, and I get where you're coming from, but in this one occasion, you are the a-hole sorry. It is a paid housekeeper's job to make the bed. You put the kitchen staff in a bad spot. They were not supposed to let you make coffee, but they couldn't contradict you as the boyfriend of one of the family. The staff, like any other waiter at a restaurant, just stands around and stands by, waiting for the moment to bring the foods in or the plates away. Imagine you were in a hotel. The cleaning crew has a job to do. That job includes the bed, the bathroom, the towels. Imagine you go to a cafe and want to make your own coffee as to not disturb the employees. Imagine you're in a restaurant and ask the waiter to sit down and eat with you, or you just bring your own plates glass in the kitchen. It's just not okay, not how it's done, and above all, those are working people with a job and job descriptions. You have to respect that. Your girlfriend should have told and prepared you, but perhaps she didn't know she needed to. That's her fault. Maybe she's just naive, I don't know. The fact is, that's the way things are run at her place. Can you accept it and not see it as exploitation? The staff is working and is compensated? Or does this make you uncomfortable? Yeah. It does sound like OP felt the need to be defender of the poor oppressed servants here. Nothing about the behavior he cites looks abusive or disrespectful to me. There's a certain distance between employer and employees, sure, but maybe both sides prefer it that way. You are suffering more from shock about how people can live this way more than anything. It can be hard to confront. It also seems like you are intimidated, and by taking the route of "they are treated horribly," you feel better about yourself. I don't think they were abusive or rude. They are paying for services and expect a standard. You wouldn't bat an eye if a small business owner asked the same for their own staff. You are the a-hole here because you are suffering from your own insecurities, masking them, and then taking it out on your girlfriend. Am I the a-hole for staying at my son's wedding after he referred to his grandmother as the most important woman in his life, even though my wife was his stepmom most of his life? My son got married a month ago, and ever since then, tensions have been high with my wife and her parents. My wife and I married after the death of my first wife. Our son was 6 when she died, but our relationship had been over for a couple of years before she passed. We had stayed legally married for a while and tried to keep up pretenses for the sake of our son. But we both met people we wanted to be with, and then my first wife died. I continued to see my wife, the woman I had met and wanted to be with, but I did not introduce her to my son for another year, and I saw her far less for several months while I focused on my son and helping him through the loss of his mom. My son was 7 when he met my wife, and I admit, my wife and I married quickly. He was a few weeks shy of 8 years old, and he struggled with my wife being part of our lives. He was still in therapy, but we also did some group therapy together with a different therapist. He was respectful to her but emotionally distant. He was not affectionate and did not love her. Over time, she did take on more parental responsibility, but we didn't jump straight into that. I didn't marry her to pawn my son off on someone else like some men do. I was always engaged in my son's life and I always parented. He always turned to his grandmother, his mom's mom. He would call her regularly and would turn to her if I wasn't around and he was upset about something. He would see her as often as he could. And eventually, per the advice of the therapist, and after talking to my wife about how she was struggling doing all the parental things, but him being emotionally distant with her, I decided she should try to fill more of a friend-aunt kind of role, and not that of a parent. She wasn't okay with it at first, but then admitted it would wear on her if he never returned her love or see him as a mom to him, and he was clear in therapy that he didn't want her as his second mom. He wanted nobody as that. Fast forward to the wedding, and during the toasts, my son thanked me and my wife and his grandmother, and he mentioned his mom and how she was always his number one, but how after she died, his grandmother was the most important woman in his life until he met his wife, and how they both loved her. My wife became very upset upon hearing this. She told me she wanted to leave once the speeches were done. I told her I didn't want to leave my son's wedding. She asked how I could stay when he showed how much he doesn't really value her or love her. She left. I stayed. And she ended up at her parents' house. When I got home, she told me she felt abandoned, and her parents told me I was a bad husband, and I should have put my son in his place, and told him only one living woman deserved to be declared the most important woman in his life, besides his wife, and that was my wife. They feel I should have left with her because the ceremony was over, and it was just the reception. Am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole sounds like you did things right with your son and his grief. Until the end, this was a beautiful story, and you should be proud. I'm sure you know that your son turning to his grandma was normal. I think on some level, you know your wife's reaction, and her parents, was not. I do sympathize with your wife that her dreams of being his mom didn't work out, but that was naive of her. I can understand her being hurt, but her behavior isn't okay. She took on the role of an aunt friend, which is appropriate, and she was treated as such at his wedding. I also applaud you for raising a son who spoke from the heart. Edited for spelling. Yes, the therapist said that some kids will seek out another mom-dad after the loss of their mom or dad, but other kids, like my son, will seek a comforting presence from the family members of the lost parent, and that some kids will never possess the wish or ability to see a step-parent or a parent's longtime partner as another parent. This has confirmed to me that my wife always hoped my son would change his mind, or would realize he felt differently than he was saying and showing. Or maybe not hoped, but believed he would. Not the a-hole. Your wife was thanked in his speech. He recognized her. She's had a couple of decades to understand and accept your son being closer to his grandmother. It's not how she hoped her step-parent relationship would work out, and I understand her disappointment, but there was no need to be dramatic about it, and be especially hurt, and make a statement by leaving, even a quiet one. Any advice you receive from people telling you to put your son in his place at his wedding because they feel he wrongfully ranked the top 2 living female relatives in his life in his speech should be summarily ignored for the incredibly poor, subjective judgments they are making. This was your son's wedding. Your wife was being very self-centered. The number 1 job of all wedding guests is to not create drama. Your wife failed. Not the a-hole. Question: do people know what your son's relationship with your wife is like? Because I see only one reason for her anger. She was embarrassed because she played the role of a loving and loved mother to the outside world. So your son's speech destroyed this image. Yes, people know. My son's friends all know. His wife and her family know. Friends of ours know. And so do both our families. This is not something that would have come as a big revelation to anyone there. Except maybe some plus ones, but even then I can't be sure that's true. Not the a-hole. But your wife sure is. She isn't his mom, she isn't, and wasn't, the most important woman in his life. Her primary relationship is with you, not your son. And the selfishness of her expecting you to walk on your son on his wedding day, because she can't accept that her relationship with you does not entitle her to a close relationship with him, is ridiculous. Your son doesn't need putting in his place, he is doing just fine. It sounds as though he was polite and generous enough to thank your wife, as well as you. Your wife needs to get over herself and realize that not everything is about her, and that she owes your son and his spouse an apology, especially if she was obvious about leaving, or if she or her family have been bitching publicly about this. She also owes you an apology.
What do you think of these stories? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories.